In-depth sports coverage from The Athletic is now just £1 a month with an introductory offer. See the link in the description to sign up. Liverpool won the Premier League at a canter last season, and they aren't obviously weaker in the 2020-21 season. So that poses a familiar question. Just how do you beat them? Well, that's difficult to answer, because there aren't many actual defeats to examine. But there are clues in games in which they've been beaten in terms of expected goals. In other words, instances where the opposition failed to win the match but created the better chances. And a few themes do appear from these 8 matches, offering hints for future opponents. Virgil van Dijk is the world's best defender, and his centre-back colleague is never as reliable. But the extent to which his partner suffered when Liverpool were outplayed is interesting. In the 0-0 draw with City at Anfield early in the 2018-19 season, Dejan Lovren endured a very difficult game and was slightly fortunate to survive a couple of penalty appeals. Lovren was again culpable in February's comprehensive 3-0 defeat to Watford, and while he's since departed, the alternatives are hardly watertight. Joel Matip twice nearly put the ball in his own net during the 2-1 win over Southampton, while Joe Gomez, who is considered Van Dijk's first-choice partner, was dreadful in the first half of the 4-0 defeat to Manchester City late last season and was replaced at half-time. In other words, in 3 of 8 matches where Liverpool have been outplayed, their second centre-back has struggled badly. The consensus is that left-back Robertson is a solid defender, whereas right-back Trent Alexander-Arnold is younger, less experienced, and a touch naive. But looking through Liverpool's list of poor performances, it's more often Robertson who's been found wanting. That goalless draw against City was a good example. Riyad Mahrez, who would sky a late penalty, led City's charge throughout the second half, almost single-handedly launching attacks in behind Robertson. Now that's not generally an obvious part of City's game plan, so it appears Guardiola specifically asked his side to focus on long balls towards that flank. Robertson was also poor in a 1-1 home draw with Leicester City, and was vulnerable in an unconvincing 1-0 win over Wolves last Christmas. While in the thrashing at Watford 2 months later, Nigel Pearson's side constantly prospered with quick balls into Liverpool's left-back zone for Ismail Assar to run onto. In contrast, and this might be a coincidence, Alexander-Arnold's wobbles have come in matches Liverpool have won handsomely. In that 1-1 draw at a snowy Anfield in January of last year, Leicester caused problems in the first half by shutting down Alisson quickly. First, Claude Puel's men pressed 4 against 4 in this situation, with Albrighton closing down Alisson and forcing a misplaced pass straight to Maddison. The same thing happened later in the half. Jamie Vardy pressed Alisson suddenly and charged down his attempted kick downfield. The ball fell to Albrighton, who began the attack, which ended with Maddison heading disappointingly wide. In the 2-1 win at Southampton in the first away match of last season, Liverpool also struggled with their goalkeeper's distribution. Adrian won't be used unless there's an emergency, but the point stands. Liverpool are so difficult to break down that winning the ball without having to play through them is a particularly attractive approach. Jurgen Klopp's approach out wide is a bit of a gamble. Rather than tracking the opposition fullbacks and forming a midfield 5 without the ball, Sadio Mane and Mohamed Salah generally maintain Liverpool's 4-3-3 system by remaining in counter-attacking positions between the opposition fullbacks and centre-halves. And that means that opponents can find space in behind them. Of the 8 sides to have effectively outplayed Liverpool in our 2-season sample, Chelsea did it best in their 2-1 loss at Stamford Bridge last September. The first example of this came midway through the first half when Liverpool were attempting to box in Chelsea at a throw. Mane was therefore towards the right flank, trying to increase the pressure and gesturing for his teammates to remain tight. But after Marcos Alonso threw the ball to Mateo Kovacic, who responded with a neat shimmy to step away from Henderson and Roberto Firmino, Mane wasn't in a position to stop Cesar Azpilicueta charging into space. And this is a factor in open play too. Chelsea's goal in that match came when Kovacic was able to launch the ball out to Azpilicueta, who was in space on the right. As Liverpool's midfield 3 were forced to shuffle across, Azpilicueta passed inside to N'Golo Kante, who dribbled through an unusually open midfield to score from the edge of the box. On the opposite flank, meanwhile, Salah's lack of tracking back meant Alonso could overlap aggressively into space, and in the final stages, as they chased an equaliser, Chelsea constantly had an overload down that flank. You see, sometimes a side's strength is also their weakness. And while Klopp is happy to give Mane and Salah the freedom to attack, Liverpool can be vulnerable behind them as a result. Now, this analysis is all based around expected goals rather than actual goals. The alternative is obvious: beat the XG. Manchester City's crucial defeat of Liverpool in January 2019 came despite the visitors creating better chances, 1.5 to 1.1 in XG terms. Arsenal's 2-1 win over them in July was even less likely. It was 0.8 to 2.1, coming just days after Burnley forced a 1-1 draw at Anfield despite being outperformed 1.7 to 0.4. The most realistic way of framing this is the other way around. Liverpool are unlikely to continue outperforming their XG so significantly. Statistics from the last 2 seasons suggest that Liverpool could have reasonably expected a total goal difference of plus 76 from the chances they created at either end, rather than the plus 119 that they actually recorded. Now, that's partly because of the excellence of Alisson and partly because of the fine finishing of Salah and Mane. But such overperformance cannot last. At least not enough for Klopp's side to manage points totals of 97 and 99 as they have done in the last 2 seasons. And so, more sides might find themselves getting a result against Liverpool this season without doing too much differently. The Athletic is in-depth sports coverage that helps fans see the game from every angle. And Tifo is delighted to be able to offer full access to The Athletic now for just £1 per month. See the link in the description for details of this introductory offer. For football fans, that's access to the writing of journalists dedicated to your team, plus David Ornstein, Phil Hay, Daniel Taylor and many more. Not to mention over 400 full-time writers offering inside access and independent analysis of every team that you follow across every league that you care about. Get local expertise and unmatched league-wide perspective. The Athletic's writers are in the bubble, on the field and behind the scenes as it all happens. Catch up, go deep, and join the conversation on the most important happenings in sports.